Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's special session of Elahé Mir-Djalali from Iranian Studies. We have the honor of having two of our students who were in Iran during the Israeli unprovoked attack on June 13th, and they managed to escape Iran in time and to get to safety. One of them, Hanieh Bakhtiari, who's a PhD student at the University of Toronto, is here in Toronto, and the other, a friend of Hanieh, Cynthia, who was also visiting Iran, is now currently in Hong Kong and is joining us online. Hanieh, would you like to start the conversation? And the title of the presentation today is Beyond the Printed Line, Beauty, Bombs, and the Stories We Could Not Finish. Hanieh.
Land acknowledgement. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. Thank everyone for showing up, whether here in person and those who are online. My friends, fellows, Iranians, non-Iranians, we're all here for this talk, to which I was really looking forward after all those harrowing experience of being in Iran during a war. Let me also specifically thank Dr. Tabakkali and Elahé Mir-Djalali Institute for Iranian Studies for, first of all, facilitating my return to Canada, and also helping this talk and providing this opportunity for me to share my experience. And also, I would like to thank my supervisor at Western University, former supervisor, Professor Kate Horitsky, who's also here. Thank you very much for showing up. Just start showing some slides, which are just only some photos. Okay, I am here today to share my personal experience of the sweet and bitter moments I recently lived through in Iran. While I fully acknowledge that my positionality is the researcher, had the privilege of leaving the country while it was in war, cannot capture the full context of what others have endured in these difficult times. It's precisely my feminist commitment to the political nature of the personal and to the value of the lived immediate experience that brings me here today to speak. I bring this narrative not as a totalizing account, but as the one that is grounded in presence, affect, and accountability for what I can narrate today. My narrative begins with the stories I longed to share about my country, Iran, and ends with an unfinished task for my field work. It all started when I invited my friend Cynthia to visit my homeland. I wanted nothing more than to show her how genuinely beautiful Iran is, to reveal the truth, which is often buried under the narrow and distorted images portrayed in Western media. I planned each detail with care. In my mind, I walked with her through every street, every corner, store side, and every scenic landscape. But it wasn't only for her in showing Cynthia these places. I was also tracing the lines of my past, and I was longing to reconnect with the beauty of my roots. This trip was not just about showing the landscapes and architecture to a friend. It was about searching for books, silences, and women's voices in the history of Iran. I had planned to locate and digitize some rare works by Iranian modernist women writers and to study how they navigated the complex terrain of publishing in early modern Iran. I had hoped to visit the houses where some of these women lived, the house where Iran Dokhte Mutash wrote her first book, a house that is now very ironically called the War Museum of Iran. For me, a specific part of Iran's history, the part that speaks to me most deeply, is not recorded in official archives, not captured by the misleading narratives of major events we commonly recall about the past. Instead, history, for me, lives vibrantly in the words of women who persisted in writing despite censorship and marginalization. It existed within the fragile pages of manuscripts authored by women who scarcely had access to printing press and publication. Iran's history is etched into feminist treatises and educational texts written by women whose identities often remained obscure, overshadowed by those of their husbands or fathers. It survived in a handful of novels and memoirs that are published in limited editions or sometimes never printed at all. Their manuscript left silently on the shelves of the libraries just to gather dust. Michel Rolfe-Trollope taught me that historians build their narratives on the shoulders of previous ones. But for many of these women that I knew, there were no shoulders to stand on because they were never engaged as historians. They were only thresholds that they carved out for themselves. They wrote into the future and imagined an Iran that had yet to imagine now. I had been away from Iran for some time, and it still remained a place that I call my true home. The space of belonging fixed into my sense of self. Living at a distance from it had never been easy, neither for me nor for many of us in diaspora. But as Edward Said once wrote, seeing the entire world as a foreign land makes possible originality of vision. In that sense, exile, or in my case, being away from the country, my studies sharpened my perceptions in a different way. It gave me a new kind of seeing and sharpened my longing and love for my country. My return then was not only a visit, it was an act of revisioning both my homeland and myself. Before arriving in Iran, I tried to explain to Cynthia what to expect in Tehran, but the words and even photos failed me. I told her that Tehran is history, but that's not Istanbul. It's filled with modern shopping malls, but that's not Dubai. It has experienced war in the past, but it's not Damascus or it's not Beirut. The only way was to let her see with her eyes, let her walk with me through lively shopping malls, uniquely Iranian in their character, unlike any other mall she had ever known. Let her experience the spirited cafes of Tehran, which are always filled with conversations of girls and boys, and there were tea and long menus of foods you may never get to experience elsewhere in the world. I yearned to show her the beautiful turquoise tiles sitting on the grand mosques of Isfahan, shining under the sky that seemed impossibly safe to me. I planned to offer her a taste of the authentic saffron rosewater drinks found only in Isfahan old bazaars, and to show her the unique harmony of a mosque and a church coexisting side by side in the historic, safe neighborhood of Jaffa. But most of all, I wanted to introduce Cynthia to the vibrant symphony, Persian cuisine. A burst of flavors and colors far removed from the conventional Arabic dishes she knew from Canada. I wanted her to taste meals that burst with colors and memory, that each bite was narrating stories from generations of women and their kitchens and the communities they shared. I remember that I learned from Sauron that food is not just food. It is invested with emotional, cultural, political significance. It speaks to bodies, histories, and desires. It's a site where identities cross the border. In this way, sharing Persian cuisine was more than hospitality. It was an act of cultural narration for my friend. And I did it. I got to show Cynthia the Iran I had always carried in my heart. I took her to the sparkling mirror halls of Niagaran Palace, through the gorgeous streets of Tehran, full of energy and defiance. I showed her the strength and unity of Iranian women, which is what I have always been proud of. We went south to the Persian Gulf, where the waters glowed in the shades of blue I can still see when I close my eyes. Cynthia told me it was the bluest sea she had ever seen, and she had already been to 35 other countries. In Isfahan, we stood in the middle of Naqsh Jahan and visited Ali Babu and the Great Mosque, and even rode horses near the square. I remember I did not have enough Iranian cash for the ride, and a woman I had never met offered to pay, and she really did, just like that, with kindness and no hesitation and no expectation. That night, we sat under the open sky with a full moon in a cafe in Naqsh Jahan, thinking that it was another peaceful evening. We had no idea it would be the last one. We did not know that the same sky would soon be torn apart by missiles, and that the city we wandered through so freely would fall into terrors of war and nuclear radiation. The next morning, I woke up to a nation's long-felt nightmare, something I had always feared. News that felt like a punch to my chest. Yes, Israel attacked Iran. Residential buildings were bombed. Children were killed in their sleep. Civilians were killed and their homes destroyed just because they lived in the same building as one of Israel's targets. It felt like the ground had disappeared under my feet. Something inside me broke, which I am sure will never be healed again. I've never felt anything like this, which was a mix of grief, panic, rage, and a kind of helplessness that made me physically sick. It was like losing a parent or part of the body, or maybe both. I wish with every cell in my body that no other person in this world experienced that morning and those bitter feelings that I had. As I know the horror and the bitterness of a war when it breaks out will never stop until someone who experiences it. My dreamy days of spending time with my parents, having barbecue at their place, munching on an endless amount of local summer fruits, teacups after teacups, after dinner with family, and dining out at restaurants of Tehran and eating ice cream in cozy cafes of the downtown Tehran, they had come to a halt by missiles and bombs from Israel. That very day, I had excitedly planned to visit the museum at Vank Cathedral in Isfahan. The museum is renowned for housing some of the oldest printing machines in the region. The printing press at Vank Cathedral in Jaffa holds historical significance as the very first in Iran, and indeed across the Middle East. But my trip ended abruptly, far differently than I had envisioned. Before I could even mourn the lost opportunity of visiting these historic machines, my concern turned urgently towards my friend Cynthia, whom I had invited to my beloved homeland. Iran is known for hospitality and warmth, but I had intentionally brought my dearest friend into what had suddenly become a war zone. Immediately, we returned to Tehran, and we were desperately seeking ways of helping her safely cross the border. That night, as we sheltered in my apartment, residential buildings alarmingly close to my apartment were attacked and reduced to rubble. As I was lying awake, I could only think of one thing. If I die tonight, it would be for my country for a reason. But what about Cynthia? Who trusted me enough journey here? The next 48 hours became a waking nightmare, filled with exhausting drives towards the border to ensure my dearest friend's safety. Cynthia herself will share more about this experience in her own words. Yet, as chaos erupted around us, those books that I had so hoped to research, remained untouched. The voices of the authors left unheard once more. The words of early modernist Iranian women writers preserved in rare manuscripts and printed texts again slipped out of my reach. But for me, this violent eruption does not signify another silencing of these voices. Instead, the women's writings have found renewed resonance in our troubled presence. Their feminist manifestos that envision hopeful future for Iranian women speaks directly to the difficult days we are facing now. Their maternal care, their powerful concern, their passionate commitment to educating and uplifting their nation is precisely the wisdom and strength we so desperately need today. Though I have temporarily left my homeland, the separation will never silence my voice nor stop my writing. I remain deeply committed to honoring and celebrating the words of these courageous modernist women, whose love and pain built the foundation of an Iran they profoundly cherished and hoped to build and rebuild. As Adorno has taught me, although I find myself away from home, perhaps the only home currently available for me, many others away from home, though fragile, vulnerable, but resilient, is found within the very act of writing itself. I conclude my talk with photographs of only 6 women, among the many others, who were brutally killed by Israeli airstrikes on Iraq. I intentionally choose not to include more faces, as I fear I would not be able to control the tears at the sight of those innocent, beautiful faces who were victims of an unjustified, unprovoked war that targeted civilians and children in my. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hanieh. Cynthia, please.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Bakhtiari and Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute for Iranian Studies for this invitation. It is a real pleasure to be here and share my brief, yet unforgettable and unique journey in Iran. My interest in Iran didn't sprout until I met Hanieh 3 years ago at Western University. Before that, just like most people in Hong Kong, my knowledge of Iran was embarrassingly limited. Iran felt far away, too far, too different, and too other. Apart from occasional news headlines when tensions escalated in the Middle East, the only other point of reference I had was Persepolis, the well-known graphic novel, which shares a similar, if not identical, narrative in mass media. Iran as a nation that fell from grace. A land once modern and westernized, now veiled and backward. The before and after of the 1979 Islamic Revolution has become a mythic binary replicated endlessly in media coverage, Hollywood films, and textbooks. Roland Barthes once described the myths as a form of depoliticized speech, referring to when a historical event or a social phenomenon is stripped of its complexity and repackaged as natural, inevitable, or universal. In my early understanding, Iran had just become that, a myth of decline, a warning tale, and even though I didn't fully trust this narrative, I had no way to challenge it. I didn't know the language and I didn't know any Iranians. Which is why becoming close friends with Hanieh was so important. It opened a door. The stories she told, photos she shared, all painted a completely different pictures of Iran. Still, I didn't want to replace one uncritical belief with another. So when she had to go to Isfahan to conduct her field work, I asked her if I could join her. I wanted to see for myself, even just a glimpse. And before we left, I heard all kinds of unsolicited warnings from friends. Underneath all these comments were two presumptions. First, Iran could only be perceived through its political oppressions. And second, the Iran I would see and, according to my friends, if I lived to tell the story, would only confirm the narratives they already believed. This is what Jean Baudrillard calls the precessions of simulacra. The idea that representations no longer refer to any real thing, but to each other in the endless loop. Iran, to many, is no longer a country. It is a symbol, a media echo chamber, a geopolitical meme. As an outsider, it is not in my position to determine how much truth in these, but I wanted to see the country beyond that symbol. When we arrived, what caught my attention first was not what I saw, but what I didn't see. I didn't see women being dragged off the street for improper veiling, nor any visible presence of the morality police. I didn't see men walking with multiple wives, a misconception often held by Hong Kongers who conflate distant Middle Eastern cultures. I didn't see a monolithic, joyless society. This is not to suggest that these things do not exist. It would be naive of me to make such an assumption. But at the very least, what I did not see disrupted the rigid images I had inherited. Images shaped by selective media framing, second-hand anecdotes, and Orientalist cliché. The absence of those expected scenes forced me to confront how much of my understanding was not grounded in lived experience, but in rehearsed narratives. It made room for something more complex to emerge. The laughter of women in parks, the warmth of intergenerational gatherings, the ordinary rhythms of life that precedes spectacles. These moments did not erase the country's struggles, but they insisted on a fuller picture, one that cannot be flattened into caricatures or consumed as confirmation. We visited Tehran, Qeshm Island, and eventually Isfahan. I saw scenes I had never encountered in the media. Bustling city streets still alive at midnight as if people never sleep. The surreal beauty of mangrove forests and star valleys in the UNESCO Geopark, and some of the most breathtaking examples of Islamic architecture. And while I won't romanticize everything, as I did see propagandas, surveillance, and also images of the Supreme Leader everywhere, I also saw kids playing in the streets, couples picnicking in the parks, and women pushing the boundaries of dress codes with casual resistance. It is true that I was there but it was out of curiosity, not hostility. I wasn't harassed. I was welcomed, fed, and asked again and again, "Where are you from? Do you like Iran? Please tell people about Iran." It reminded me of what Umberto Eco mentions in her work, The Role of the Reader, in which she argues that texts, whether books, films, or societies, are not static. They are fields of possibilities, open works. What a reader brings to a text shapes how that text is interpreted. The same is true of places. Iran was not a closed story, but I and my fellow people have been taught to read it as if it were, and that faulty reading can have real consequences. And then the story changed in the early morning on June 13th. We woke to breaking news. Israel had launched a military strike deep in Iranian territories, targeting areas in Tehran and elsewhere. Messages from friends began flooding in, and they wanted to know if we were safe. In contrast to the dramatic images on the news, Isfahan's morning remained unbelievably calm. After getting ready, we headed down for breakfast. Life on the surface carried on. Guests looked slightly tense, their expressions weighed down by something unspoken, but routines persist. Children bickering and played in the background, and at a near table, someone was even discussing wedding plans. The ones who looked most anxious, besides Hanieh, were four Polish tourists sitting in the hotel lobby, eyes glued to their phones, endlessly refreshing for the latest updates. Strangely, perhaps because I had never experienced war before, I wasn't as panicked as I thought I would be. Watching the news unfold on the hotel television, I felt as though I was caught in a parallel world, present but not quite touched. We decided to return to Tehran that afternoon before the situation escalated. During those tense hours, when I took short breaks to look down at my phone on the bus, I started to notice something. The media, especially in the East, not West, had already picked up the story, but not the one we were living. While the West and the East share a similar narrative on the television news, it was a complete opposite on social media. If you check Reddit, you will find people from around the world flooding Iran's subreddit with messages of support. However, in the Chinese language online world of Hong Kongers and Taiwanese, most of the posts cast Iran as the aggressor for building nuclear weapons and threatening its neighbors. And that was why excuse me. And that was why Iran as well had to use preemptive strikes. Or some posts are in a more sympathetic framing, seeing Iran as a tragic land where innocent people suffered under a tyrannical regime. Some voices do support Iran, but they are unfortunately a minority. Iran became a villain or a victim, never a home, never a place where people laughed, worked, and dreamed. I can't offer a neat explanation as I'm still trying to make sense of it myself, but I'm fairly certain it has something to do with international relations. Given the threats Hong Kongers and Taiwanese faces from China, it is understandable that many instinctively side with China's adversaries and demonize its allies. Embracing the logic of the enemy of my enemy is my friend almost too literally, without accounting for the complexity on the ground. Excuse me. I just recovered from a cold, so sorry about that. So what troubles me is how quickly narratives hardens, how geopolitical alliance get folded into simplified storyline of good versus evil, friend versus foe. But real lives don't fit in these binaries, and in this case, the narrative isn't just misleading, it can be dangerous. That night in Tehran, from the balcony, we witnessed multiple drones being intercepted. Our hearts sank at every flash of an orange dot in the sky. The next day, we began the long drive to Koy, a small town near the Turkish border. We first stopped by Hanieh's parents' home to say goodbye. Then we picked up a family friend, Leila, and set off. Hanieh and Leila took turns to driving through the night. It was 12 long hours on the road. While I stayed awake, I tried to take in everything I could from the passenger seat. The city was still relatively calm, but signs of war were unmistakable. Long lines snakes out from gas station, banners honoring the fallen soldiers hung from bridge. And once we even saw a missile striking across the sky from Iran towards Israel. Hanieh was determined to keep me safe.
Cynthia, do you want to take a break to recover your voice?
No, I'm good. Thank you. So Hanieh was determined to keep me alive, safe and alive, and she knew she might not be able to do that if we stayed. And this is where I find myself torn. I had the privilege to leave. I carried a passport that could easily cross the borders and lots of countries. I had a body that did not bear the burdens of national suspicions. But so many others, including family, friends, strangers who had shown us small, unforgettable kindness, they couldn't leave. They have to stay and were forced to continue their life under the shadow of wars. I arrived in Vank the next day in the afternoon, safe but alone. I kept returning to one thought. Why do we keep telling the same stories about Iran? Why do some narratives of chaos, oppressions, and danger travel so easily, while others of kindness, resilience, and ambiguity are treated as suspect? The truth is, people see what they want to see, or rather, they see what they have been taught to look for. I don't mean to say that there are no real problems in Iran. And there are, but those problems exist alongside joy, humor, art, and beauty. And when we erase that coexistence, we don't just flatten reality. We prepare ourselves for violence. We, as non-Iranians, more than often justify sanctions, drone strikes, and support any potential regime change under the guise of moral duty. In narrative terms, this is the problem of closure. When a story feels too tidy, too resolved, it often conceals the mechanism that made it legible. Looking back, I realized what I had hoped to find in Iran was not truth, but frictions, disagreement between image and reality. And I found it, even though not the way I expected. Even in wartime, contrary to what is described on the news and social media, Iranians remained calm, collected, and sometimes even unconcerned. There was a quiet resilience, not panic. People made jokes, bought ice cream, went to work as usual. The war did not crush them into absolute fear, and that, perhaps, was the most radical thing I saw. As Bath reminds us, narrative is not innocent. It is structured, it is coded, and it is always an act of power. So here is my small act of resistance, telling a story that doesn't fit, a story without neat heroes and villains, a story interrupted but not over, and I hope to continue it and meet all these beautiful souls again one day. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia and Hanieh, for your retrospective on Iran in war. And could you entertain some questions, Cynthia? Hanieh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Colleagues here in the Zoom, any questions?
I do have a question,
Huh?
Hanieh.
Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
A bit louder.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very thoughtful. And I have a question regarding to the, how the connection of the Zan Zendegi Azadi movement, because you're mentioning about the women's of Qajar in your presentation. How did you see, how did you observe the existence of the Zan Zendegi Azadi movement, through your trip to Iran?
I think whether for those of us who have visited Iran after the movement, and for those who have not, especially those who have visited, like because I constantly travel, so some of us don't, but I notice the changes, like because I go like every summer, and then like that's like a neat record in front of my eyes. And I can say that even for those who have visited Iran after the movement, as in the years of the human life liberty, it's not very difficult to see that the movement has given Iranian women a very unrepeated kind of courage that they never had before. That I always tell my friends or anyone who compares Iranian women with other women in the Middle East, or because that's very easy to simplify, right? Like Iranians are Muslims, so we are Muslim women. I always tell them that Iranian women are very different from other women in the region. And getting back to your question and linking these two together, I just want to tell you that what I could observe and sense as a woman in Iran, being there after the movement of women life liberty, I could conspicuously sense that Iranian women had a louder voice in not only about what they wear, it was not only about the dress code anymore. Their voice has reached other levels of decision making after this movement, and they're no longer like those passive agents that are only like fighting for a little bit of more like dress code freedom. You can see that those who are still veiled or those who are not veiled, there are definitely not only taken more seriously by the hegemony of like a patriarchal culture that runs in many parts of the world, not just Iran, but also they have believed themselves as more important, far more important, of course, decision makers in their country, because they once proved to themselves and everyone who was watching them that no one can decide what they wear. And this time, no one can decide what they do for their country, what decisions they make for the future of their country. They were really louder. And let me give you one example. In my building, there are 8 other families living like in that building where I still have that's been called home. And the day I was leaving, I had to knock on a neighbor's door for something. And I have a background about that family. I know how like that family is very much oriented around like the authority of that like father, husband, male figure in the family. But when I talked to the lady of like in the interview, who's my neighbor, she said that her husband has asked her to leave. And she said, no, I'm going to stay. And she had the final say. And they really stayed. And she was totally, like, I'm not saying she was absolutely not concerned about the war, but she looked totally not really disturbed by what was going on. Because she looked like really well, she had a like neat makeup, perfume, like beautiful clothes. She was doing what she wanted to do, like as she's a housewife, like she's not educated or whatever. She doesn't hold any like position in the, I don't know, in the government, whatever. But she was showing her resilience by first of all looking beautiful and smelling really nice at a time that I expected everyone to be like going crazy and scared. She was very calm and collected. And by deciding to stay in her home and not leaving, while her husband had told her, like, oh, you should leave, it's not safe here. So it's just one example of how I think women have louder voices. They make decisions more firmly compared with 5 years ago when it was like before me. That's just a personal interpretation. Maybe like others do not agree with me, but that's what I.
Dr. Mushiri.
Thank you for illuminating talk about your both of your experiences in Iran from different perspective. Obviously, I wanted to know what was the reaction of Iranian people to the attack and to the war that started. Was it an unprovoked attack? How did they cope with it? How did they react to daily? I know. I mean, you've been there for part of it, but nonetheless, the initial shock, perhaps. If you can talk about, what was the reaction of people, especially when I don't know when it started. You were in Isfahan, right? If I'm not mistaken. So then you went to Tehran, right? So I wanted to know how people kind of reacted to the. You mentioned some of it, but in general, in the street, when you talk to people, were they, scared? Apparently, they weren't. Some of them weren't, but were they like looking to some sort of change, or were they like keeping calm and say, this is the reality after having, 8 years of Iran-Iraq war? They're kind of used to it, perhaps.
It's a good question. So like Iran and Iraq war ended in I don't have the like in so it would be like 80. I think in 1996 it ended, right?
It's
88. Okay. So many of us who were born after the war and the Iran and Iraq war ended, we had no concept of what a war-torn country means, what means living under sirens and getting bombed and then hearing explosions and seeing missiles in the skies and stuff. So many young people had no first experience of war, right? So it was like their first time going through such. But of course, many people like from my parents' generations, they had already been through the upheavals of Islamic Revolution and then the 8-year war with Iraq that took so many lives, civilians, not civilians. But what I could see in both sides of people who had experienced a war and those who did not was that, of course, like people, we all know that people in Iran come from very different political persuasions. Some of them hate the regime. Some of them really like are siding with the regime. Like they all have their own mindsets about what needs to be changed, who needs to get out of the country, like about the regime, the Islamic regime. Some of them hate it, some of them like love it, whatever. But I don't want to totalize those experiences because I'm not denying everyone was really, really scared. Many people were not acknowledging that because they had like in the first few days they had the idea that okay, this is going to be another conflict that we have previously had with
in the fall.
yeah. I think because we had one in last winter or it was in fall or winter, when there was an explosion in Tehran by Israel, and there was also like last summer assassination of Hezbollah leader in Tehran. So they just had the idea that okay, Israel has completed the attacks on those like specific targets and it's going to be over. So they were like in a kind of denial mode of the situation. But those who were really like getting the sense of the situation, those who were really, really scared, they were responding very quickly to the situation by thinking of like evacuating Tehran, of course. Those who had the privilege of leaving the country, they decided just to go to the borders, cross the country, cross the border to another country. But most of the people were, I don't want to say that they were calm, but it seems that they have been waiting for this day that they had been somewhere in the back of their brain. They had been like mentally prepared for such a thing. That yeah, they had, even those who do not like the regime, and there are so many of Iranian people who disagree or like hate the regime, or they want a regime change in the country. But there was a certain level of trust in the regime that they're going to protect us, but that level of trust was really like cracking down, and people were really getting scared. But there's one thing that I can totalize, and I can say that most people agreed on that, was that everyone disagreed, of course, everyone condemned this violent attacks, because it was the first time that I think many Iranians did not think Israel is going to do these evil things. Like, there were many people who naively thought that this is not going to happen. They could see that their lives is in danger. They could see that civilians, children, innocent people, totally unrelated with any, I don't know, nuclear plants or political implementations or whatever, they were being killed at the hands of Israel. And it was a moment that I think everyone came together on one point, that Israel was the enemy. That was the only thing that I think was bringing people together, and they reunited. But I do not want to deny the fact that many people were scared, and really scared. Yeah. And I think since I can also have an answer to this question from her perspective, because she was observing very closely.
Yeah.
Cynthia, do you want? Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I just really noticed that the older generations and the younger generation had like sort of different reactions, especially when we were like stopping by your family friend in Khoi. I remember the father was watching volleyball games and fell asleep. He was not concerned at all. Meanwhile, Hanieh was like devastated, so worried about the situations. So yeah, that's the difference I can notice.
All right. We have a question online from Professor Nida Maqbooleh. Nida John, could you please ask your question?
Cannot unmute.
Oh, she cannot.
Yes.
Okay. The question from Professor Maqbooleh is that first, thank you, Hanieh and Cynthia, for sharing your testimonies. One comment and one question. I think your stories, especially when taken together, are powerful evidence of what theologians and scholars have called accompaniment. Accompaniment of and for each other is the frame through which we can understand your scholarly, political, and personal work across Canada, Iran, and Hong Kong. In other words, accompaniment is a research practice and a form of relation that we can learn from you. My question is to ask if you will publish these testimonies somewhere. I don't know.
I mean, we do really hope we can really make something publishable out of it. And the reason is that, first of all, I think the experience was very, I hope I will never go through it again, so let's call it unrepeatable. But the uniqueness of the situation was that it was not only me who was in danger. I had invited another friend to a safe country, to my home, and I was trying to be the most hospitable host in the world for her. And then I had dragged her into a war zone. But all those experiences, I think, when we go through every part of it, we still haven't been able to process everything because we went through a lot. And by this, I'm not trying to say that like we were the victims or whatever. No, we had the privilege of leaving the country. And that kind of gave us a sense of assurance that most of the people did not have. But at the same time, because we were able to get out of the country and then look back at that experience, I think Professor Mahfoula's comment is really meaningful here, that yes, we can put those things together and then bring dots together and make something out of it that I still have no idea like how those testimonies are going to look like. But I think that can definitely be something that starts from what we experience, but ends in helping other people know about how being in a wartime, even for 1 week, even for like less than a week, can give you an experience and can break things in you that you will never heal from. That when we hear like side with people of Palestine, and then when we consider ourselves as activists who are like siding with people in Palestine and like showing support, in what sense that can be really considered enough? In what sense it can be really considered meaningful? And to what extent are we really engaged if we have not experienced the war ourselves? And if the war seems far away and for someone else, and how that siding is sometimes unconsciously, I'm just talking about myself, I'm not putting it to anyone's activism, but sometimes that support that we show for people in Gaza or Palestine is just something just to give me a better conscience about people, or those like images that I see in my phone about like people being slaughtered, more than being really about those people who are in that situation. So I think like that experience, if one day we want to, and we really hope to do so, we have already talked about it, but we still need time to process things that we went through. If we want to write about it, I think that would be one of the things that will be putting at the center the ethics of testimony and the ethics of showing support for those who are in war.
Just to follow up on this question, and then we have others. At the moment that war started, I'm being a little bit provocative. Did you feel guilty towards sort of Cynthia? You had promised all this beauty to see, and all of a sudden you have the ugliest development that she's sharing. And did Cynthia, did you panic at all that this unwanted war you're visiting in a place that supposedly Isfahan is very beautiful? And how did you feel? Did you feel guilty? Cynthia, were you panicked?
Or did you regret?
Yeah, did you regret? Say, Hanieh, you promised me this beauty and you're delivering war to me, and all the stereotypical writings on Iran are actually correct.
Well, Hanieh promised me an unforgettable trip, and should I don't regret it. Actually, I have a very like, it opens up my eyes, and I have a like more perspective. Like the beginning of my talk, I said that like I thought Iran was very different from Hong Kong, but the longer I stayed there, I sort of noticed the similarities. Like especially after the war, like I like one example is that I've seen some Iranian diaspora in maybe United States waving the flag from before the Islamic revolutions. It's actually quite similar to what happened in Hong Kong during our protests. Some Hong Kongers, I'm not saying the majority of them, of course, but some Hong Kongers did also wave the colonial flag of Hong Kong during the protest. I am still digesting how to like frame it in if we have publications on that, but that is one of the very significant similarities that that caught my attention. So yeah, and I don't regret going to Iran. I was enjoying the trip so much. I've seen so many different sides that I have never seen on social media or like TV or film at all. So if I have a chance, I would like to go back and revisit the place again.
Very good. Mr. Fouzi?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Hanieh. Thank you, Cynthia. Uh, Thanks for to both of you for trying your best to bring in as many pointers as possible. It's such a complex topic, multidimensional. And I really appreciated, Cynthia, when you tried your best from your first visit to Iran to get as many pointers as possible, especially in our Iranian culture, that we are dealing with many, many issues at the same time. We just mentioned two amazing, important layers that are probably, as you mentioned, probably not very on the surface now. You know, the war and the previous war that we experienced, and also the experience. And but they are nonetheless there, right? You tried your best to express that that sensation that you got from this, and also you tried to say that it's so recent and there are so many things that you have to process. So this is so normal. They are all in your mind and you need to process them. And also, I appreciate that you tried your best to have a balanced view. Again, we have so many views in this Iranian culture. I mean, from far away, we see that in oppositions, that you try to touch a little bit here and there. I couldn't hear much about, those political sides. And I think you all the time come to the focal point of Israel, which really influenced your whole observation. My question for you is, how do you see, we had a very good question, I think it came about the future, whether or not you want to, add those additional layers, or you want to, work on this to say, how do you see it in terms of all these layers, multidimensional? It's very complex. Do you think your essay is going to be a very different one after you bring all it's multidimensional layers that we all consider performing?
So you're trying to say that there's so many things going on in Iran, and at the time that we visited the country, that is very, yes, it's because just right now when we started talking, just like in 20 minutes, so many important things like brought up. The 8-year war we had in Iraq, the aftermath of that war is still felt in parts of the country. We cannot deny it, right? And then we also had this feminist movement of women like liberty just 3 or 4 years ago, right? I think if we want to write something about this, I'm going to assume that I'm writing for, of course, a non-Iranian audience, because as an Iranian, you have like a lot of background information in your head, and you know so many things, and you take them for granted. But if you're a non-Iranian, and then I want to like write a story, I have to go through so many things to let you like really feel the reality and see different aspects of that. But I think something that will make this writing this testimony very challenging, as you mentioned, is that first of all, there's so many things going on that you really do not know where to start. And then there will be also a challenge for a personal experience, because that was only our personal experience that we cannot claim was everyone's experience. I was very much apprehended and really, really scared when the attacks started. But I could see people who were who looked a little bit like untouched by what was going on. I had the prospect of leaving the country. Many Iranians do not have like that. That's where they live. That's where they work. That's where they have their children, grandchildren, their investments. Like, so I cannot really apply my experience as like a universal experience of all Iranian people who were in that situation. But I think something that we will both keep in mind about like bringing all those like sea of points and aspects just to bring into this testimony is first of all to keep it ethical in the point that this is just a personal experience. Personal experiences, of course, can be validated. They're very important, but they cannot be applied about everyone. And the other thing that we will be keeping in mind about the multifaceted aspect of this experience is just to keep one thing in mind, that the whole thing came into being because of an unprovoked attack that destroyed everything for us in our experience. We had plans of staying for 10 more days. I mean, I had plans of staying for 2 more months. I had plans of visiting libraries, doing research, going to different museums, collecting information, taking photos. I had plans of visiting so many like loved ones. I had plans of doing so many other things, visiting corners of Tehran that has memories for so many of us. But all of them were destroyed because of the attacks. So I think that will be the central thing, that everything came to a violent end, and I will never put that aside.
Hanieh, you're now blaming your lack of research in Iran. Is that
It's a story on Israel.
Yeah.
Only.
Exactly. Yeah. I can make that claim, right? To the department.
Here's a move. Very good.
I have a short comment or short suggestion. Your memories are really fresh right now. So if you sit on it too much, you're gonna lose a lot of nuance that you picked when you left Iran, and you might forget them. So my humble suggestion is write them down, even in like brief notes. So you have those things when you go back and revise it and write it down, you have a solid ground that you can build upon.
And don't try to complicate it and include everything. What is important is both of you, your experience and what you saw and what you felt, rather than responding to entire history of Iran and political shifts and changes and lineup of this and that and that. I think if you try to respond to everything, you're not going to have much of your own distinctive experience at that distinct historical moment that will show.
Exactly. I mean, everybody has its own biases. Because you went from Canada and you had the option of leaving Iran, so obviously you have your own biases. As you said, people who live in Iran and can't leave even Tehran, never mind leaving the country, they have their own experiences, definitely. I wanted to know your experiences, both you and Cynthia, leaving Iran at the border. What was the experience like? Obviously, there was some guilt when people leaving the country. They were leaving loved ones behind. You can't do anything about them. And I heard, I don't know, you can correct me, some people were trying to get to Iran from the border. So I wanted to know your experience on the border as well. What was it leaving, talking to other Iranians leaving also, and perhaps people who are getting?
Since I was here today, who told me you heard about those like large number of Iranians who were trying to return to Iran through the border?
Yeah, I saw on Al Jazeera that some Iranians are like, after finishing their vacations, they are now trying to get to the border to go back to Iran. But at that time when I was leaving, it was June 15, I think. Hanieh, can you confirm? Yeah.
I think
Well, at that time, not that many Iranians were crossing the border. There were some, but not many. However, I remember I couldn't buy any flight tickets to Istanbul at that time. And it was fully booked by Iranians, and also the hotels were full. And when I was in Bonn, I passed by quite a few Iranians. Like they were trying to find a way to buy flight tickets as well. So no, but they were quite calm, very collected.
We have a question from Professor Fatemeh Keshavarz, the director of our sister institution at University of Maryland. Professor Keshavarz, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Very clear.
Okay. Well, my question to, first of all, thank you so much. This has been so eye-opening and in a way healing to see that the image of the shattered, kind of confused, broken people that you usually get from Iranians is not true. Not that we didn't know, but it's always good to see some, you know, firsthand testimony. But I want to say something about the life, freedom, woman, life, freedom, or liberty, whatever we call it. I think that, Hanieh, you referred to it as having had a great impact and how women now have a stronger voice. Don't you think that we may be able to look at it in reverse? Because over time, women did develop this voice, that a movement like Zan Zendegi Azadi could actually happen. And that one event, I mean, it was an important event. I don't want to downplay it at all. But this idea that things happen so fast, it seems to be for, at least for me as a non-historian, easily, acceptable. But when you actually think about the details of how things form over time and experiences, I would say that these women these personalities have been in the making for decades. And then, of course, we had the Zan Zendegi Azadi, which was an expression of that. And it had a lot of support from men as well. So just a quick point, and I mean, if you like to comment on it, I'll be very happy to hear that. But just something that came to my mind, and I thought it'll be, good to share with you.
Sure.
Of course, the movement did not happen overnight, right? It has been something that has been boiling for years. And Iranian women, like in a very specific case of the grounds for this movement of women life, liberty, that was the dress code and the freedom of like having hijab or not having it. In that very specific case, I think Iranian women have been fighting since the very beginning of Islamic revolution, but just that those collective efforts came into a kind of they came into a collective action and a real tangible result when the movement of course was happening, and the benefits that it has had for women afterwards. So I totally agree with you that we cannot decontextualize it, that we cannot say that Iranian women have a louder voice just because of the movement right now, just because that happened, and it is giving Iranian women more authority. But of course, it took some time, and it definitely took some dedication and so many other things for the movement to come to fruition. But once it happened, if this is a personal observation, I cannot claim that this is 100% true. But my observation is that even in those families that are still like strictly religious, or those families who are still committed to being veiled, and like those women who are like having those Islamic attire of wearing a veil. I think even in those families, even in those settings, women have been given, not have been given, that is a very wrong wording. Women have gained far more authority compared with the past. And this is my personal observation, that women can decide in the family as decision makers far more firmly compared to 10 years ago, with even like 6 or 7 years. So I know that this did not happen overnight, but after that, things have really changed. And
Mohammed,
when
can
you
I have
travel, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
can I have a quick follow-up? I
Please.
actually thank you. I think you just gave such a comprehensive review of these important things. That tells me also something else, that we may need to separate the Islamic hijab from the authority, that or religious belief from the authority, because don't forget it. I think Iranian women have very intelligently called this hijab ikhtiyari or libas ikhtiyari, so that the ones who choose to wear the Islamic attire or outfit, if we could generalize like that, they also make a choice, and therefore they are bringing their own voice to the table. And I think that it is for those of us living in the US. I mean, I'm not so aware of exactly the atmosphere in Canada, this separation between religion and having a voice, between looking a certain way or dressing a certain way, is still reigning even in academia. So I think that the point you're making is very important, that in those households, as well as any others, decision making happens in the same way for women. Thank you.
Thank you much. Nusha, please.
Hanieh, welcome back. Welcome back, Cynthia. We were following your story closely through the media and through our own internal media. And thank you for sharing your story. It's helped, I think, all of us process. We're still processing. My questions were two-part and sort of been addressed already a little bit by Professor Mahmoud, and I appreciate that note about accompaniment. It's a regrettable experience, like as you said, really. I was wondering whether there was a moment when you both, as two diasporic individuals in Iran, was there a moment where you thought something about being Iranian or Iranian woman clicked for you, distilled for you, because the way you got to see yourself through Cynthia, so seeing yourself as self and other through her, as you were guiding her, guarding her. Is there a moment, and maybe Cynthia, if the question applies to you as well, is there a moment where you saw yourself in it sounds like you did reflect on this a bit, and being from Hong Kong. My second question, you've already addressed, but it's really fascinating. You talked about testimony. Have you thought about what genre this piece of writing would it? I think we're all maybe assuming that it would be scholarly, but it sounds like maybe the genre to maybe be more personal or creative to account for all of these, the complexity that you're right into.
So getting to your first question, can I ask for some clarification? So if you are you asking if like seeing myself through Cynthia in inland in Iran was giving me a different view of myself, or being an Iranian woman?
Basically, was there a moment that you, without Cynthia's presence, it would not have, or an insight maybe?
What did you gain through her presence and feeling responsible for her safety?
Okay. I want to like share. Let me give you one example of the journey. Like when I was with Cynthia, I felt a little bit of having more confidence of being non-conformist, because as we were talking together, we were not speaking Farsi, we were communicating in English. So people could see that, like, if someone was going to judge me, was they could see that I'm at least I don't live in Iran. I'm Iranian, or I have like ties elsewhere other than Iran. So I had a kind of more confidence of being non-conformist. For example, when we were in Isfahan, I saw a clergyman, and I was really curious about something because they had set up something that they were calling the kind of like a stand, or like a very, I don't know, very temporary kind of museum of Iranian women's achievements, since I can remember. And he was sort of in charge of it, like he was having the turban, and like he was an husband of him. So if I was without Cynthia, I wouldn't dare talking to him, because first of all, I would be judged by people around me that, why are you talking to this guy? You know, people don't like him, right? And second of all, I would not maybe feel safe. Maybe I would say, oh, he's going to assume that I have other intentions of talking to him. But because Cynthia was there, I had a kind of like maybe a safe detachment at the same time of being inland, but at the same time being detached from like the culture. So I had the courage of approaching that clergyman and talking to him because she was there. And one other thing, like, which is also like a very personal thing about me, is that sometimes when we were, for example, in Qeshm Island, Cynthia, of course, like even now in Tehran or any parts of the country, I'm telling you that you partially have a good freedom of not having any hijab, but like sometimes Cynthia was asking me, "Oh, why are you wearing it?" And then I was telling her that because he's a taxi driver, I don't trust him, and I don't feel safe around him, and that's why I'm doing it, and that is the reason that I'm having the hijab here, so that there was something that I could see through her, that, oh, I just do it very intentionally in some situations, but I wear hijab at some situations because it helps me. And I decide not to have it because it gives me a freedom of doing this and that. So yeah, like having her around, of course, was giving me a different view of living the life of a woman in Europe. And about the second question, so I think Cynthia and I would be, I studied at Western University when I was a master's student, and she was a first year PhD. She's a CL PhD there, third year PhD. We were both in women gender studies department, so we come from like a feminist background. So I think whether it will be academic or creative, we will definitely have those feminist commitments of writing is through the lens of two women when it's through the experience, but about not the rest of it. Maybe like you can be you come from that, English department writing, like with that writing expertise. So I think you can be a really great help, right? Yeah.
Just one question. I recently, since the war, I have noticed that the whole discourse on Latin and Iran, which was really absent for many decades, has re-emerged. And a lot of Madahis that used to be Hosseini and Karbala centered, all of a sudden have become Vatan centered and Iran centered. So it's form of Sinezani, concert of chest beating, concert that has moved from religious to intensely nationalist, and much of it is led by Madahs, these sort of religious preachers. Did you witness any of these or see them making?
This is, I think, something a little bit close to what I was explaining for Abu Fazjan. Yes, you could see that. Oh, for example, there was a guy who was explaining to another person that because during the months of Muharram in Iran, many people like give free foods, right?
Yeah.
And he was saying that he's going to do it earlier, like earlier than the actual time, because there's so many people leaving their homes or coming back to their homes. He doesn't want those people to have the cost of paying for the food. So that is something of transforming your religious sentiments to a kind of national commitment, right? So I saw so many examples of what you're saying.
So post-Islamic development, at least I see it this way.
Yeah, like it's
Shifted.
It's no longer like standing within our, because at least this is my understanding that before like this Israel attack on Iranian soil, siding with the country was in many cases often interpreted as siding with the Islamic regime and being religious. But now siding with the country is something much beyond it, and it's something broader, and you can be part of it no matter what political orientation or what religious commitment you have.
There is a sort of distance between the regime and the country. And so to speak.
But so many people from different walks of life are coming together. Yeah. And yeah.
Any other questions? Online, in person? No? If not, please everyone join me to thank Hanieh Bakhtiari and Cynthia Lam for sharing with us their great experience, and wish you the very best in writing your testimonials. And we look forward to all of you.